Thank you, and it's very good to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to be talking about the origins of compassion, and I'm going to be switching gears a little bit. I'm going to be talking about very, very young children and mostly the role of parents and what they can do to foster compassion in their children. My definition of compassion is a deep awareness of the suffering of others and a desire to alleviate that suffering. And with that definition in mind, I can say to you that this is something that we see in children in the first and second years of life. We call it concern for others, and I'll tell you a little bit what I mean by that. As I said, it's present in the first year. This is an important time to think about and practice the teaching and nurturing of these qualities, because this is a point in brain development of great neural plasticity, which means that young children are going to be quite malleable and receptive to the different kinds of environments that they grow up in, for good or ill. By concern for others, the three basic components. One is empathic emotions that you can be seen in the voice, in the face, in gestures, pro-social actions, helping, sharing, comforting, defending and protecting victims, and a kind of cognitive understanding of what's going on in the other. There are four central issues that I want to cover, two of them more than the other two. Development, how these qualities of concern for others develop in the first couple of years of life. Nature, biology, and we know from twin studies that there is a heritable component to these qualities of concern for others. But that means that some children may be born with greater capacity for caring than others, but it doesn't mean for those others that is immutable, that that change is not possible. And this is why I think it's so important to look at the environment and the qualities of nurturing that are going to help children develop these capacities. Nature and nurture interact, and people are now starting to study gene-environment interactions. That work is more recent, and I won't be talking about that today. Mostly the development and the environmental practices that lead to individual differences in children. Notions about how empathy develops from an evolutionary perspective, it's seen as a quality that we actually share with other mammals and other creatures as well, that come from the distress cry of the offspring that the parent needs to attend to, needs to nurture and nourish the child. And in the course of doing that and responding to the distress and the needs of the infants, the qualities of empathy, this may be one way in which the qualities of empathy may spread, in this nurturing and nourishing the forging of social bonds. Now, when people wonder about, well, how does empathy start in a child, what's often spoken of is the notion of contagious crying, or so if a newborn infant in a nursery is crying, other infants will start to cry. And when the other infants start to cry, it's not just because they're hearing an aversive sound, because carefully controlled studies will show that they respond more to the cry of the other than to an equally aversive, noxious sound. So there's something that's sort of built into the sort of the social nature of us responding, and even infants, to the distress of others. Now, fairly quickly, this changes in the first year of life, and what you start to see in infants in the first year of life is a concern for others. You see it in their facial expressions, you see it in this kind of sometimes tentative reaching out, and so on. one very important message for parents is to simply notice this. Because what happens is these are subtle emotions, subtle expressions, and so often parents are more caught up in their children's tantrums and their fears and their fights and so on, that often these tender expressions can go unnoticed easily. I've had parents say, my child doesn't show concern for others, and I'm looking at the child and they're showing it, but the parent can't see it. But it takes to translate these expressions of concern into carrying action. It means that other aspects of development have to occur before that can happen. I mean, the child has to have more physical skills, motor skills, other kinds of social skills that allow them to do something for the other. But this is the motive force for the doing. And in work by Warneken and Tomasello, they have shown in a variety of ways helping behaviors, spontaneous helping behaviors in 1 to 2-year-olds in a variety of different kinds of situations. And these kinds of behaviors can also be shown toward someone in more severe distress, someone who's crying, someone who is in pain, and physical and verbal comforting start to come into the repertoire of the 1 to 2-year-old child. This is from a photographer who had come to our lab to do a story, to take pictures for a story on empathy in young children. And so in order to do that, we had to have testers and mothers feign distress, pretend to be hurt, pretend to be sad. And then he was taking photographs of the child. So here a tester is pretending she's hurt her foot, and you see this kind of expression of a concern on the child's face with the oblique brows, which can show concern, and the downward mouth, and a lot of interest too. And she does something then to help the tester. Then the mother pretends to hurt her hand, and you can see the child wincing in pain. I mean, really mirroring, and that's probably going on up here too, mirroring the mother's response. Well, then she comes over and she kisses the mother's hand. Well, the photographer thinks he's not getting the best shot, so he keeps asking the mother over and over again to be hurt. And the child keeps helping and loving and caring, and then finally she's had enough. And she glares angrily at the photographer. She knows where the problem is coming from. But that's a short kind of situation, and it ends well. But imagine something like that going on all the time in a child's life, and how a child could be dragged down by it. Here's another example, because it isn't just children helping their mothers, but this is an example of an 18-month-old who's trying to help a crying infant that her mother is taking care of. And she does 6 different things to help this infant. He has thrown away his cookies, and first she tries to return his cookies to him when he's in his high chair. Then the mother puts the baby in the playpen, and the little girl runs over there. And she starts first to stroke his hair, to pat his shoulders, making sympathetic cooing sounds. And none of this is working, and she tries it for a while. And so finally, she goes into the other room to get her mother and brings her in, taking the mother by the hand. This is an 18-month-old, and took her mother's hand and placed it on top of the baby's head, showing this kind of empathic concern throughout. So I don't really think it gets much better than this, and I think in some ways there's a certain component of compassion that peaks actually very early in development. This child is when trying to comfort a depressed, distressed mother. She's pretending to be sad there again, and he's tried at least 5 or 6 different approaches, and nothing is working. And here he's actually imploring the experimenter or the tester to come and do something about it, and it's in his vocalizations as well, which obviously you don't get from this. But there's just so much potential there. So this is a time when there's a lot that can be encouraged in young children. And everything I've shown you, it translates into, these are all, everything I'm showing you is based on solid scientific evidence. So of course, over the course of the first year between the ages of 1 and 2, we see in both of these, like in real distress situations and where distress is being simulated or feigned, we see an increase in children's pro-social actions during this time period. And we see an increase in their expressions of empathic concern, what you see on the face and what you hear in the voice and so on. And in terms of the cognitive understanding, we see increases in that as well. When you go to up to the 3rd year of life, something interesting starts to happen. If you look at the feelings, the empathic feelings or concern, and the cognitive understanding, which we call hypothesis testing. The hypothesis testing is continuing to increase with age, but this concern has leveled off. It's almost as if it's reached its peak at this time. And the way I think of it is we don't grow emotions in the same way that we grow some of our cognitive capacities and in terms of the kinds of skillful acts that we can use. So it's also a time when the empathy may go underground, and it may be a time of vulnerability. But I do think it reaches a peak there. So knowing that all of this stuff is starting to happen in the 2nd year of life, and knowing that this is a time when parents begin to socialize their children more in terms of internalizing rules of conduct, setting standards, learning how to behave, being more caring of others' feelings and actions. A lot of that is starting around in this time period. And there's a lot of empirical evidence to support the fact that there are things that parents can do to heighten those qualities that I've been talking about in children. They can model those kinds of caring actions. Reward. I'm not so sure how important that is, I mean, other than to say a kind of positive acknowledgement of what the child is doing, but not rewarding in the sense of bribing. But there are, and a number of different specific things that they can teach as well. So we also have, and I'm just going to quickly go through these slides here. These are various illustrations of different kinds of positive caregiving that parents can engage in. Talked about that. Talking with children about feelings. And then I could say, well, this is all easier said than done. It's hard to be this way, and there's a lot of adversity and suffering that parents experience in a number of different ways, in which anxiety, depression, anger, hostility are deterrents to healthy compassion in different kinds of ways. What I've come, and then we have the biological constraints that some children are going to be more difficult to nurture than others, but those are the children that need it even more. What I've come to believe is that it isn't just in the specific ways of being and doing of the parents with the children, but what is ultimately perhaps of greatest importance is the practice of self-compassion, and I've given some examples there, but there are a variety of ways to do that. And that's going to help the parents regulate their own emotions and be better parents to their children. And just finally, I want to mention that there's a preschool loving kindness curriculum that's being conducted at the University of Wisconsin now, which is another, it isn't just parents, it's teachers, and introducing these ideas into curricula very early in development. And one of the things that the preschoolers do in this loving kindness curriculum is they have this daily intention. May all things that I think, say, and do not hurt anyone and help everyone. and imagine a world where everyone was practicing these kinds of intentions. It's a dream, but I think it's a dream worth pursuing. Thank you.